Good morning, or if you are listening in the afternoon, good afternoon, or good evening, or good night. Greetings. So our practice period continues. And for some, that can be a deepening into the practice, into the new normal. The practice period becomes normal. And we found our way of living it. We found our way of negotiating and navigating the routine of the practice period. I was delighted to read that somebody has decided that they can include in their weekly routine a half-day sit each week. He said, just 5 periods of zazen, kinhin in between. So perhaps that's an idea or a thought that some of you would also like to do. And he said he was also planning to do a full day sit once a month. So really making this a practice period. And talking with some of you during the week on Messenger, I was suggesting other things that you can do. Chanting is one thing. Chanting some of the texts that we chant during our Zen ceremonies. Enmei Juku Kanongyo, Shosai Myo Kichijo Dharani, the Heart Sutra, the Genjo Koan, Harmony of Difference and Equality, the Meditation on Loving Kindness. You can also listen to some of these chants on various websites, including San Francisco Zen Center and my own. There's a full moon coming up, and you may want to listen to the full moon Bodhisattva precept ceremony, or even join in with it. This is a way of engaging body, speech, and mind. And it can be a way of encouraging ourselves to continue with the practice. This morning was interesting for me. I had in mind to change the top altar cloth because we've changed season. So if you look at COVID-2, you may be able to see that there is a green altar cloth on top of the cream altar cloth. So that top altar cloth I have in mind to reflect the season, and the green was for spring. I put the green one there in February, and that replaced, well, at the time I didn't have a winter altar cloth, which I wanted to be black or navy, so I continued to use the brown altar cloth for the autumn. Brown altar cloth was a gift from Michael. And the green one that I had been using, I think, was a gift from Hebden Bridge Zen. And so this morning I changed it. It's the first Sunday of summer, and the first of summer was on Friday. So I should have changed it on Friday, but I changed it this morning to a yellow, which I bought in Hebden Bridge the last time I was there in February. And in the meantime, I received a gift from Frances and Bernadette of a navy altar cloth, which I am looking forward to using in the winter. It's an Ingen-ji altar cloth, so it has the Ingen-ji emblem on it. So brown for the autumn, navy for the winter, green for the spring, and yellow for the summer. A different altar cloth for every season. So I changed this altar cloth and tidied up the incense bowl, took out all those little stubs from offering incense during the week, smoothed out the ash, changed the foliage, and decided to change Some of you may know. Well, you've seen it on the opening boughs and closing boughs that there are 3 candles. There's the Jiko candle, a little tea light. Then there's the Kuan Yin candle. And then there is the Buddha candle. And I like to play this game, I suppose, to see if I can light all 3 with one match. So I strike the match and I light the Jiko, and it's easy enough then because it's fairly close to the Kuan Yin candle. I light the Kuan Yin candle, but then comes the difficult part, because they're actually in 2 different rooms and the door is open between the 2 rooms. I have to walk with this match from the Kuan Yin altar to the Buddha altar. And in doing this, I pay close attention to the match flame, particularly as I cross the threshold, because there seems to be some extra air currents at that point. And I pay close attention to the flame because, well, it can easily go out. So if the flame is diminishing, I tilt the match downwards to encourage the flame to come up. And if the flame is getting too strong, so the wood is burning too quickly, I tilt the match upwards. And the flame can actually be on one side of the match. So I rotate it to encourage it to continue burning. So as I walk towards the Buddha altar, I'm paying close attention. My gaze is on this flame, manipulating its angle, its position, rotating to keep it alive, but I don't want it to be too alive. And then when I'm standing at the altar, well, this morning I shifted my gaze to get a fix on the candle so that I can work out where I need to bring my flame to the wick. Then there's always, do I have enough match left to keep that flame alive until the wick catches without burning my fingers? So it's a dance. And this morning, as I lifted my gaze from the flame to the candle, there was no candle. So I blew out the match. I forgot that I had taken the old candle stub off the altar with the intention of replacing it. But in changing the altar cloth and rearranging the altar and fixing the incense, I forgot that I had done that. And so I came in with my match, and because my gaze was totally on the flame, I didn't notice until the last moment that there was no candle there. When you forget something, you really do forget. It's simply not there. Those moments are precious. It reminded me of when I had not been meditating long. I had invited a few friends around for dinner. And we had our dinner and maybe some dessert. And I said, I need to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom. And when I came back, the room was empty. So there was that moment where your mind kind of does a somersault or a belly flop because the scene that it has met doesn't match its expectations. So I quickly somersaulted and figured that they were all hiding. But what they didn't know was that I had recently bought, for the fun of it, a super soaker. So I got my super soaker, filled up the tank, and went around the house, drenching people as I found them. But what about that moment when I opened the door to the living room, dining room, and nobody was there? What about that moment when I lifted my gaze from the flame and saw that there was no candle? These moments are precious because these moments are where the relative meets the absolute. For the briefest moment, you glimpse things as it is. If only we could extend that moment of seeing things as it is and no story for it. As the Buddha says in the Pali Canon, when in the seen, S-E-E-N, there is only the seen. But you could also say when in the seen, S-C-E-N-E, there is only the seen. And when in the heard, H-E-A-R-D, there is only the heard. I suppose you could also say heard, H-E-R-D. That's insight. When in the seen, there is only the seen, you are enlightened. As we settle into a practice period and we settle into the quietude of the practice period, little things like that may occur to you. Certainly, as people sit a sesshin or a retreat, you can see in them, after a few days, they're letting go or dropping off. As they become more present, the present becomes them. They let go the burden of self. They let go the narrative. They let go their agenda and follow the schedule, if there is a schedule. So doing a practice period, doing a sesshin, entering more into silence and quietude, and we are more prone to experiences such as this. Bringing our attention to what is happening inside us. Dogen says, take the backward step that turns the light inward. And I think he says, and illuminates the self. As we progress with the practice period, there's probably in a lot of you an expanded space or a greater sense of spaciousness. There's less need for busyness. So we are less distracted. And at first we might want to distract ourselves, but gradually we settle in. And in that state of less distractedness, you can see things more clearly within. See the dynamic, the internal dynamic. I'd like to digress a little bit just to tell you why the photograph this morning is what it is. So during the week, I decided to do something that I had intended to do for quite a while, which was to rotate the wheels of my car, to put the front wheels on the back and the back wheels on the front. And to do this, I was going to need 2 jacks, at least to make it relatively easy. I would need 2 jacks, prop up the right hand front and back wheels and swap them. So there's 1 jack in the car, grand. My other jack was in the shed, and it's near those paint tins where I had seen the nest. Now I'd like to say when I first saw that nest, I thought there were 3 or 4 eggs in it. I think there were 4. But as I lifted a paint tin, I heard this flutter, and I turned and saw this brown thing going out of the shed. I didn't know if it was a finch or a wren, but later I saw a wren around that area quite a bit, so I figured it was a wren. And then, during the week before the one just gone, at the nest, or in the nest, I had seen the solitary chick sitting bolt upright, not moving. I thought, what happened to the others? And then I looked, and the chick was gone. Okay. So today I was getting the jack. It's a hydraulic jack, and it's in a plastic box that's about the same size as a tin of paint. And as I lifted it, there were these 4 chicks, and their mouths were opening, closing, opening, closing. Wow. And I had seen a finch going in and out of the shed, and whenever I went in the shed, the finch would be at a different part of the shed. So I took the jack and I did what I wanted to do, and when I was putting it back, there they were again, mouths opening, closing. While I was working on the car, the finch was going in and out. And on 1 or 2 occasions where I had to go into the shed for something, the finch was always somewhere else. So, when I was putting the jack back, I couldn't resist taking a photo. And what I found was, when the light changed, their mouths would open. So to take the photograph, I had to wave my hand overhead to create that light change, and the mouths open. So I can't help wondering what happened to that single solitary chick the week before. Did it grow up and fly? Or was it a decoy? Was it like maybe one of the adults pretending to be a chick while it sat on the other eggs? It's unlikely that they had some kind of cardboard cutout to act as a decoy. So that's the story. And on the times that I disturbed the wren, was it actually looking for that finch's nest so that it could puncture the eggs? Who knows? I don't. But it's great to see those chicks opening their mouths, expecting food from one of the parents. I got chicks in my shed. So that was just to fill you in on the story of the nest that's in my shed. It may be that wherever you are, they've started to talk about lifting the restrictions, the lockdown restrictions. And here in Ireland, the government has set out a roadmap for a phased lifting of those restrictions. And it may be that if your government or if your situation is that they are going to lift these lockdown restrictions, you may notice that you're now looking forward to something. You're thinking of the things that you'll be able to do when these restrictions are lifted. Or it may be that you feel as though it's too soon to lift restrictions, and that lifting them will actually be putting you and others in danger. So it's something that you are not looking forward to. And it may be that as people talk about lifting these restrictions, you get a sense of the lockdown coming to an end. Maybe. And it may be a ways away, but there's still that kind of talk about the end of the lockdown. And that may create a stirring within you that you can pay attention to, because you've got all this extra spaciousness that is being cultivated by outward circumstances and by your inner practice. So what does this talk, if there is talk, of either extending the lockdown or lifting the restrictions, what kind of response does that stir up in you? Will you be glad to move back towards what is normal, or what was normal? Or will you be disappointed? As you do a practice period at Green Gulch or Tassajara or anywhere else, as you move into the second half and the end begins to appear on your mental horizon, you may feel a sadness that this wonderful life, this perfect life, this perfect way of going about life is coming to an end. Or you may feel as though it will be a relief to get out of this prison. the practice of taking the backward step and shining the light inwardly, that does not judge whether feeling optimistic about the end of the practice period or feeling pessimistic about the end of the practice period. That's not really the issue. That's not right or wrong. But can we notice what feelings arise in us and allow those feelings to be there? They are part of the present. And if those feelings are particularly strong, and we may be still feeling a sense of loss, a sense of what we could have been doing if this had not happened. Because remember, this practice period is kind of enforced on us. We did not choose it as such. So we may still be feeling a loss of what we had and what has been taken away. We may be feeling a grief for what humanity is going through at the moment. And we may be feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the situation that we are in, or we may be feeling a deep sense of sorrow for what the world is going through. And it may be one today and another tomorrow. Can we sit with those feelings and make room for them to sit with us? And it may help if you ask yourself, where do I feel this? Where in my body can this feeling be felt? Sometimes it's in your stomach, maybe in your chest, maybe in your throat, maybe in your arms. Where do you feel this feeling? And then allow that feeling to be there. It's part of the present. So when it comes to looking forward to something, if we can sit with that looking forward, we may get a sense of what's behind it or what's underneath it. A kind of discontent, perhaps, with the present. A wanting things to be different. And it's the same with hope. Hoping that things will get better. Again, it's not as though you should not hope. And it's not as though you should not look forward to something. But it is, can you see that you are looking forward to something? Can you feel that looking forwardness? Can you see that you are hoping? Can you feel it and sit with that feeling? What happens when your world is turned around and the scene that you see does not meet your expectations? How did Lieutenant Bligh or Lieutenant Bligh come to terms with being booted off the Bounty? And those who went with him, 20 or so people in this little boat, overcrowded, hoping that they can navigate their way to some kind of safe port, safe haven. Their world changed overnight or in the course of a day. Their trajectory into the future changed. And those who mutinied and stayed on the ship, their destiny completely changed. Once they committed that act of mutiny, there was no going back. As Dogen says, destiny is like a bolt of lightning, emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash. How do we deal with things when it does not meet our expectations and our trajectory? When the rug is pulled from under your feet, how do you deal with things? What we usually do is come up with another trajectory, another story, a narrative that can reorient us in our life. So those 20 or so men on that small boat had to orient themselves towards getting to land, and not just land, but a safe port where they could have help. Wikipedia didn't tell me where they ended up, but I suspect it was somewhere in Australia. And from there they were able to get back to England. And then some of the mutineers, a ship was sent to Tahiti, and some of the mutineers had stayed there. They were brought back, arrested, some of them were hanged. But a lot of the other mutineers had made their way to Pitcairn Island in the South Pacific. And they weren't discovered there until 20 or so years later. But for them, I'm sure life was not easy. arriving at an uninhabited island. Luckily, it was uninhabited, perhaps. Having to start everything from scratch. That could be a great adventure, but also a great hardship. And I'm sure many of them regretted not being able to see home again. Something final about their act. Something irreversible about it. So we hope for a better future. And our actions in trying to make that happen can be disastrous or can be wonderfully successful. But can we look at that internal activity of hope? Can we see what effect it is having on us in terms of our relationship to the present? Is there some way that we can interpret what is happening? One of the things that I like about movies and books is the opportunity it gives you to study karma without it being personal. And a good movie or a good book, a good story, will be credible. You could see how that would happen. You could see how this person would choose that, and how in choosing that, this would happen. So we all make our choices within our given context. But in a practice period, we get to shine the light inwardly and see what is happening. I mentioned last week that in the Pali Canon it says, the Buddha says, this world is anguished, being exposed to contact. For no matter upon what it conceives, its conceits of self, the truth is always other than that which it conceives. And I mentioned that the word contact was part of the 12 links of samsara. You've got this wheel of samsara where we go round and round, chasing after this, chasing after that, getting this, getting that, doing the same thing again. It's cyclical. We want something, we get it, we want something else, we get it, we don't get it, we get disappointed. We're always chasing after something that will never really satisfy us. So that wheel has 12 links in it. And theoretically, you can just join in anywhere on the wheel and go around. But it's handy to think of it as the start, because it's the 12 links for the arising of suffering. So when you get to the arising of suffering, that's the end of the 12 links. What is the starting point? Starting point is called ignorance. And the story goes, in dependence upon ignorance arises the karmic formations. In dependence upon the karmic formations arises consciousness. In dependence upon consciousness arises name and form. In dependence upon name and form arises the 6 sense bases. In dependence upon the 6 sense bases arises contact. This world is anguished, being exposed to contact. But today I want to look at the karmic formations. Basically, when we hope for something, this is what we're hoping for. And this map gives us a context that we can see when we are hoping for something. And what we're hoping for depends upon our previous activity, our previous life, what we were doing before this practice period started, or what we were doing before this cycle of consciousness started. If we find ourselves hoping for something, this is great. This is shining the light inwardly to illuminate the self. This is the self in operation, and we've seen it. We may want things to get back to normal, and we may hear that they're going to lift the restrictions, and we're thinking, great, I'll be able to do this, or I'll be able to do that. So at that stage where you say, I'll be able to do this and I'll be able to do that, we've gone through karmic formations, consciousness, and we're at the name and form. At the name and form part. We're naming what we'll be able to do. We're able to name what we're hoping for. But what we're hoping for is karmically conditioned. Another way to look at this, if you are familiar with computers in a very rudimentary way, is boot up. The boot up applications, they're the possibilities that arise as the computer is booting up, before it is instructed what to do. The energy has to feed into these applications. They're like its karmic formations. what we have put in our consciousness by our past activity shapes the possibilities that we look forward to and that we hope for. So these emotions or these feelings of looking forward to something, of hoping for something, are clues that we are actually turning the light inward, and we can see the activity of looking forward and see the activity of hoping. Independence upon ignorance. So what is that ignorance? The karmic for independence upon ignorance could say the karmic formations are switched on. And independence upon karmic formations arises contextual awareness or consciousness. And then arises name and form. That ignorance, we tend to think of ignorance as the absence of knowledge. But it is really, in this context, that ignorance is the absence of seeing things as it really is. In the absence of seeing things as it really is, arises the karmic formations. When you're presented with an empty room on an occasion when you're expecting a full room, there's just a moment where the relative narrative misses a beat. And in that missing a beat is the opportunity to see things as it really is. For the briefest moment, perhaps, you do see things as it really is. But we switch on the karmic formations and we think what we can do. What must have happened? We have a story. So rather than sitting and resting in that seeing things as it really is, we spring into action and activity. In slowing down, in returning and returning to the present, we move closer and closer to seeing things as it really is. And we can see how out of that void, out of that no story, emerges stories. Learn to take the backward step that shines your light inward and illuminates the self. Elsewhere, Dogen says, this is in the Genjo Koan, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study is also to observe, like I study the flame of the match. I observe the flame of the match. We study the self. We observe it. We observe how it functions and how it operates. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And when you forget something, it's completely forgotten. Thank you all very much.